Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome back to Funnel Trade. I was having a discussion with a patron a couple days ago, and we got into the topic of the potential catastrophic risk. And that being that, say, Magic just continues to print too many of the valuable cards, they continue to extract too much equity from the game, and that the boxes themselves can't become collector's items in their own right. The company has bad management, makes poor decisions, and in the long term, the game craters. And that would be the black swan event for Magic. You know, we've seen after 2022, after 2023, and Magic 30, we've seen basically Cynthia Williams and Wizards of the Coast try as hard as they could to destroy Magic, and they weren't able to. It says a lot about how robust the game is, about how robust the brand is, but there are always still the catastrophic risks, the black swan events, the things that are incredibly difficult to prevent. And it's okay to keep those in the back of your mind. And you better believe I think about those things all the time. I think about things like, what if Pokemon were to just, make some terrible decisions? What if they wanted to replace Ash with a different character in the cartoons? And the reality is the kind of hero's journey that Ash goes on is very appealing to young boys. It's a type of story that boys love, and the way it's presented is really well tuned to appeal to very young boys. And that's why the Pokemon cartoons do so well. But what if they replaced it with a different character that young boys did not relate to? Well, the next generation of young boys would not be drawn and kept at the cartoons the way they have been for the last 30 years, and Pokemon down the line would suffer. And that's kind of a catastrophic risk they could face. Now, I don't think Pokemon USA is ever going to be that dumb. They have an absolute winning formula worked out with Pokemon. They know how to replicate it, and they've been doing it for decades. All they have to do is just keep on doing the same thing and keep printing money. So you do need to think, what are those huge risks potentially out there? And for me personally, the ones that I think about are, what if we ever got to some point where people did not want to go play card games in person anymore? Because the in person card game experience at a card store is what drives this industry. And if somehow we lost that, that would severely hamper the ability of these games to get traction in the future with new players, for new people to get into them. And we kind of have dodged that risk. I would say 10 years ago, we thought that risk was much more likely than we think it is today, because 10 years ago, Amazon was still kind of in its ascendancy instead of plateauing, and digital games were still rising. And we thought the risk from those things to stuff like Magic and Pokemon was much greater than it actually turned out to be, where we are now in 2025. And so I think we've dodged that, but in the future, maybe that could become a real problem again. And that's kind of one that I worry about on the long timeline. Another catastrophic risk, specifically to Magic, that I worry about is what happens when Magic is 50 years old and it has 50 years of technical baggage, of technical debt, of questionable decisions that may have not been too bad at the time, but compounded upon each other for decades. And so we've kind of seen situations like that in the past with Magic. Things like, let's say, the storm keyword, right? They say we will, we're probably not going to print too many more cards with storm on them because they thought it was a bad idea. Personally, when I play with a storm card, I always just marvel at the idea that it ever even made it out of R&D into playtesting, much less got published, and got published many times. But they dodged that bullet by essentially not printing more storm cards. And there are mechanisms built into Magic with the way that it's executed expansion to expansion that protect it from those kind of things in the short and medium term. Things like, hey, we're building this limited environment to be played self-contained, so the mistakes of the past can be quarantined out of the current limited environment. And the same thing with standard rotation kind of does that too, though the tail on it is a lot longer because now standard is 3 to 5 years. So they do have some mechanisms to protect that, but also they've done some things in the last few years that kind of increase those technical problems in the long term. Things like rotating modern. Modern Horizons 2 and Modern Horizons 3 were designed to rotate Modern and Legacy so they could sell cards into those formats. And those are kind of long-term problems because they wrecked what was previously a moderately stable metagame within them. I mean, you would very rarely have cards coming out of standard sets that could make splashes in Modern and very rarely in Legacy. But now when you have straight to Modern products, well, they're designed to make splashes so that they'll sell, so that they can creep the power on it, rotate the meta, and force everyone who loves that format to buy new cards. And those are the kind of technical baggage type things that they really can't repair. They can't just come out one day and say, Modern Horizons 2 and 3 are now completely banned in Modern. That really would not sit well. It's not feasible for them to do that. And so I worry as a catastrophic risk to Magic, when we hit 50 years of Magic, what are the accumulated technical debt kind of problems going to be? And like I said, they do have those mechanisms built in to protect themselves and where they can kind of quarantine off some of those problems a bit. But they can also build up in ways that are difficult to predict now. And so we don't know what that will look like in the future. When Magic's card pool, what is it now? I've heard 20, 30, 50,000 unique cards. I've heard all three of those numbers, but in the future, when say it's 70,000 unique cards, how do you keep the game healthy, especially when formats like Commander are the most popular? When you have a 70,000 card pool, how do you get people interested in playing a format where all but about 30 cards are legal? How do you get them interested in trying to deck build when they have to sift through up to 70,000 cards, depending on the colors they want to play? So those are kind of accumulating problems. That's one of the catastrophic long-term risks that I worry about. I also worry about more generally in markets, population growth. For now, population growth looks good for the whole world. I think it's going to be terrible when it turns negative. What we need to solve problems in the future is more brains thinking about those problems. And so a catastrophic market risk to the entire world is that human population starts to shrink in that for the entire world. We need more brains, more opportunities to get Einsteins and Mozarts and Newtons and Galileos and things like that in order to create great things and invent things and solve problems for us. And so having fewer brains born into the world every year is a really bad thing. It's also really bad because markets will start to shrink. So I still don't think that's going to happen within my lifetime. But if it started to, that would be one of those catastrophic risks. And we could certainly see, I think it's plausible that there could be some type of economic situation that led to that within my lifetime. I think it's unlikely, but it's something I could certainly imagine happening. And so when you think about these catastrophic risks, you need to make sure you keep them in your mind, but don't be paralyzed by them. Because if you're too worried about Magic over the last 2 years, you missed out on this whole 2-year bull market. And maybe even worse, I've had people tell me that they essentially sold out of Magic at the end of 22. They got so down on it that they sold out into 22, beginning of 23, and essentially at the bottom of the market, they sold out, and then they missed all of the upside of this bull run that we've had for the last 2 years. So don't be paralyzed by your fear of those things. Just constantly reevaluate them and say, is this something I still think is a plausible risk I need to think about? If so, do I still think that it's unlikely enough to happen that I don't need to do anything about it now? And if not, what do I actually need to start doing to prepare for this risk? And so don't worry so much about it until you actually think you see it catching up to you in the rearview mirror. Let me know what you think, guys. Thanks to everyone who makes this content possible, especially my very generous supporters on Patreon. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and join me on Funnel Trade.